Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Robert Hintz, and I started my ARTA grant with a worrying concern that I have for American cities that are starting to gather a lot of urban sprawl, and Columbus being one example. And I was interested in this and how to address this as an architect in my career moving forward. And I chose Germany as my country of study because of the catalog of cities that range from over 500 years old medieval wall cities to recent cities that had to be reconstructed after World War II during bombings on both the Allied and the Axis. And also how they reconstructed this to be reconstructed cities based around existing infrastructure. I traveled to 14 cities in 12 days. These cities were kind of bunched up and grouped based on a range of city planning, landscape amenities, and how architecture works to accommodate the larger cityscape and the smaller public realm. The first cluster of cities that I went to are known as along the Romantic Road. These cities are more of a tourist destinations, but still represent a typical vernacular that you would have seen in medieval wall cities. This is an example in Rothenburg. Even though it's a little bit more of a tourist destination, how the town squares and architecture interplayed with the actual cityscape is still alive and actually maintained due to the high tourist coming through. And this is the cathedral in Rothenburg, and this is one of the great examples that I was looking for in my study, not just because of it being a great architectural example within the city, but how it allows for city amenities with using of section, the use of road, the use of public transportation while still being an architectural feature within the city. And not just certain architectural features, but also this is actually the Rathaus, the town square, which now becomes a public gathering space. It's not used as much anymore for public meetings, but it's actually now in terms of civil law determining, but more about people gather here for schools, for tourist groups, and they still have great iconic views. This is the one you find on any postcard that you look up, but also it's a great tool to see how they handle section within a dense aspect, within a dense city, and maintaining that and using it as a asset and not a hindrance. But these cities were very much non-surviving in the sense that it's heavy based on tourism, not in a certain kind of realm of business or recreation or education. So then I traveled to the town of Tübingen, just about half an hour south of Stuttgart, which actually is a college town. It has a great town and gown aspect, very much the same vernacular of those on the Romantic Road of Rothenburg, Dinkelsbüro, but it is a college town that is surviving and is thriving with offices, recreation, education, and it still maintains that thick urban aspect of how to use section and how to use architecture to navigate and create really rich amenities within the landscape. When I arrived, I thought the town was kind of desolate. Little did I know I was there on a holiday known as Corpus Christi, and this town and gown town actually was celebrating this. Everything was closed, and they're celebrating some sort of college tradition where they get around this river that cuts through the city, and they have a peninsula in the middle of it, and they have this competition. So very much like America, this is 8 o'clock in the morning, and that's in the foreground is a student drinking beer. So much like here, but as you see the multitude of people just using the public space, you see the boats in the background. The winner gets some sort of trophy out of the colleges, and the loser has humiliation for the rest of the year until the next Corpus Christi. But it was a wild event in terms of camera crew, and everything was shut down. The only thing I could get into was the coffee shop that was only around that spot. But it was just great to see a small town, a small college town, still thriving, and still in terms of density. And as I was thinking about this in terms of how these small towns are doing it, and then the larger scale, going back and forth to Stuttgart, kind of being that central hub in the south part of my ARTA study, I was interested in comparison between that and Columbus. Columbus being a town of 223 square miles, a population of about 823,000. when I was in Stuttgart, I had the feeling of a much larger metropolis with a lot of the amenities, a lot of the architectural features, a lot of the landscape. But I was quite surprised to know that its population is very close to Columbus, but not even half of the Columbus size. So what they're doing in terms of using the architecture to provide amenities, using the landscape to provide amenities, is quite shocking, quite a refreshing realization that these larger cities can still do what the smallest cities are doing. From there, I traveled to a couple towns of Karlswald and Sprawl. Karlswald was actually bombed in World War II on the Alliance side. They decimated it. This was an old hunting ground palace. So in the north aspect of the town was the hunting grounds, the forest, and on the south side is where a lot of the guest houses and the town thrived from. After it was bombed, it was still reconstructed. So this is the Schloss now. It's actually a museum. And when you go there, you can actually get to the top tower, and you get a great panoramic view of the city. So to the north, you have the landscape, which is still heavily used by the public. And actually, I was there during a architectural pavilion being constructed. The event that it was being constructed for wasn't happening until the next week, so I didn't get a chance to see it in action. But you still understood that the town was still growing, the town was still thriving, and since the bombing, they understood how to use the radial aspect of the city and the pie-shaped cutting grid to actually activate the city in multiple scales. So this is actually the radial aspect of the city, which is used for cars only, and here they actually use it as a minor to the major public street access that they wanted to capitalize on. So streets gave way to the public access, either under the road or even in the city, where the public realm continued on and this nice intermingling of how the city was laid out. From there, going north to Sprawl, it's a palace town, but the palace itself is a bit more pavilionized. You don't understand it as just one building. You understand it as a pavilion of multiple buildings. And what evolved from that and how it grew is something quite interesting. So here is the old palace, and as it pavilionized and grew out, the city kind of grew from that and had the same vernacular, and then it expanded even more so in how it organized itself, with the main gardens access becoming the next main road in, and how that led you down into the main squares along the way as well. So it's still more that you don't know if this is part of the palace or not, still pavilionized, still has that same vernacular, same style, going into the town, which kind of loses that, but still has that pavilionization. From there, going north to Cologne, Wuppertal, and Dusseldorf. These were the larger metropolises that kind of collectively put everything together in terms of what I was looking for, of landscape amenities, city planning, and how architecture meandered through both of those realms. Cologne was the tour de force to all three of these. It's most well known for a great outer green belt, which is heavily used, and not only that, though, a great public space for walking in order to get to different programs. 5 minutes away, you were in the heart of downtown with rich urban aspects, with sometimes the streets being closed off altogether. So here's a map of Cologne, the green belt that circles the entire thing, and then the River Rhine dividing it as well. While I was there and walking through it, they heavily emphasized with info signs on the green belt and the idea of these tendrils of space branching out from the city as a whole. And these not only provided nice moments, but just a variety of differences. From a colonnade, this is actually near their college, a colonnade of trees wrapping around, to a canal which actually branches out to a little bit of an upper scale residential. And even as you're walking around this, you find these nice little moments of private parks, because in Germany, a lot of what I've noticed, they don't have private yards. They usually have public amenities or garden plots where you go away and then you have your own little backyard garden. But much like America, though, they still suffer from parking issues. While I was there, I rented a car to give me the freedom to go to cities as I need to and have my schedule be a little bit flexible, but I ran into parking issues. This is actually not a parking lot or parking at all. This is a loading dock area that people just took over, and I've experienced this and worried as I parked my rental car here a few times. But even within the city, though, this green belt is still showing itself, or at least the necessity for landscape is still heavily seen and heavily used. And it's a great moment just in terms of like as you're walking around to have these moments of repose, to just relax. They're actually starting to sometimes close down streets to make them pedestrian only, so cars cannot get around there. And actually the architecture's growing into the sidewalks and taking over to where now the streets become its own sidewalks and the pedestrian streets growing from that. And to go back to compare that to Columbus, Cologne is still smaller than the size in terms of size, but its containing of urban sprawl is still great, and the population is even greater than that of Columbus. So the amenities provided and the differences just range throughout the entire city, and it's shocking how it happened, considering that they're still building, they're still constructing, even from a town that's known for its 12 romantic cathedrals. And in terms of infrastructure, Wuppertal is a town not that far from Cologne that has a small creek river running through it, too shallow for any transportation or displaying of resources, but yet they use it as a asset in a public transportation that goes through the entire town, but they still have a richness of architecture that addresses the cityscape, addresses the people, but yet these tendrils of landscape lead you away from the town into large public parks, very much like Cologne, but not so much of the Greenbelt since it's more of a linear town than actually a square. And from there, my last city was Dusseldorf, a smaller version of Cologne in terms of how it has canals, how it has public transportation, a richness of architecture. But it's here when I kind of started to realize, as I was traveling, I would every now and then run into people that spoke English, and they would ask me what I was studying for, and I told them containment of urban sprawl in German cities, and it surprised me how they always had one reason why it happened. Either, we have shops on the ground floor and residential up top, or we have a great public transportation, or we have green spots. They thought it was a one-trick pony. It was one thing that made their cities great and thrived. And it's from my study and from these cities that I traveled that I realized it's a collection of all three, and not only just one way, but how multiple ways that these cities can mesh together, work together to make a city thrive, make a city prosperous, and make it great. Thank you.